Thanks a lot, Cosmin. Thanks, Parasite. Thanks, Hong Kong. Thanks, Brian. Is Brian here? Of course, after this kind of speech, he discards. Like you leave an inspiration and you go away. And then we're left like to grapple with it, and this is my fate now to be in this position after. Well, he even managed to cut his biography short, and mine somehow became much longer than I ever thought it to be. Well, I'll try to perhaps to give certain trajectory of what brings us to perhaps what Brian was talking about, into this psychedelic state of capitalism affecting your subjectivity and becoming, and yourself becoming a body of it. And the body is missing. June 7th, 1987. An unsettling week. 2 select committees. The failure of mother's suspect Palmer to reach its reserve at Sotheby's, and wearing arguments with Sarah about our endlessly postponed divorce and her over-reliance on ECT. She's strongly for the former. I as strongly against the latter. I suspect that her patients are suffering for me. But above all, there was my visit to the boy. Confusing, ugly, and yet strangely inspiring. Inviting me to Daventry, Governor Hanson referred to him, as does everyone else in the Home Office, as the boy, but I feel he has now earned the capital letters. Years of being moved about from Rampton to Broadmoor to the Home Office Special Custody Unit at Daventry, the brutal treatment and solitary confinement have failed to subdue him. He stood in the shower stall of the punishment wing, wearing full canvas restraint suit, and plainly driven mad by the harsh light reflected from the white tiles, which were streaked with blood from leaking contusion on his forehead. He has been punched about a great deal and flinched from me as I approached, but I felt that he almost invited physical attack as a means of provoking himself. He is far smaller than I expected and looks only 17 or 18, though he is now 29, but is still strong and dangerous. President Reagan and Her Majesty were probably lucky to escape. Case notes. Missing caps to both canines, contact dermatitis on the scalp, a left-handed intention tremor, and signs of an hysterical photophobia. He appeared to be gasping with fear, and Governor Hanson tried to reassure him, but I assumed that far from being afraid, he felt nothing but contempt for us and was deliberately hyperventilating. He was chanting what sounded like Allah Akbar, the expulsive God is great cry used by the whirling dervishes to induce their hallucinations. The same over-oxygenation of the brain brought on, in milder form, by church hymns and communities singing at cup finals. The boy certainly resembles a religious fanatic. Perhaps he is a Shiite Muslim convert. He only paused to stare at the distant aerials of Daventry visible through a skylight. When a warder closed the door, he began to whimper and pump his lungs again. I asked the orderly to clean the wound on his forehead, but as I helped with the dressing, he lunged forward and knocked my briefcase to the floor. For a few seconds, he tried to provoke an assault, but then caught sight of the Sotheby's catalog among my spilled papers and the reproduction of Mother's Samuel Palmer. That serene light over the visionary meadows, the boughs of the oaks like windows of stained glass in the Cathedral of Heaven, together appeared to calm him. He gazed at me in an uncanny way, bowing as if he assumed that I was the painter. Later, in the governor's office, we came to the real purpose of my visit. The months of disruptive behavior have exhausted everyone, but above all, they are terrified of an escape and a second attack on HM Kui. Nor would it help the Atlantic Alliance if the US president were assassinated by a former inmate of a British mental hospital. Henson and the resident medical staff, with the encouragement of the Home Office, are keen to switch from chloropromazine to the new NX series of central nervous system depressants, a spin-off of a Porton Down's work on nerve gases. Prolonged use would induce blurred visions and locomotor ataxia, but also suppress all cortical function, effectively lobotomizing him. I thought of my wrangles with Sarah over ECT. Psychiatry cannot wait to return to its dark ages, and tactically vetoed the use of NX until I had studied the medical history in the special branch dossier. But I was thinking of the boy's eyes as he gazed on that dubious Palmer. In 1982, during the state visit of President Reagan to the United Kingdom, an unsuccessful aerial attack was made upon the royal family and their guests at Windsor Castle. Soon after the president and Mr. Reagan arrived by helicopter, a miniature glider was observed flying from the home park in a northwesterly direction. The craft, a primitive hang glider, was soaring at a height of some 120 feet on a course that would have carried it over the walls of the castle. However, the special branch and Secret Service marksmen could fire upon the glider. It became entangled in the aerials above the royal mausoleum of Frogmore House and fell to the ground beside the long walk. Strapped to the chest of the unconscious pilot was an explosive harness containing 24 sticks of commercial gelignite linked to NCB detonators and a modified parachute ripcord that served as a hand-operated triggering device. The pilot was taken into custody, and no word of this presumed assassination attempt was released to the public or to the presidential party. HMK alone was informed, which may explain Her Majesty's impatience with the president when, on horseback, he paused to exchange banter with a large group of journalists. The pilot was never charged or brought to trial, but detained under the Mental Health Acts in the Home Office Observation Unit at Springfield Hospital. He was a 24-year-old former video games programmer and failed Jesuit novice named Matthew Young. For the past 8 months, he had been living in a lock-up garage behind a disused Baptist church in Highbury, North London, where he had constructed his flying machine. Squadron leader Walsh of the IAF Museum, Hendon, identified the craft as an exact replica of a glider designed by the 19th century aviation pioneer Otto Lilienthal. Later research showed that the glider was the craft in which Lilienthal met his death in 1896. Fellow residents in the lock-up garages, former girlfriends of the would-be assassin and his probation officer, all witnessed his construction of the glider during the spring of 1982. However, how he launched the antique machine, the nearest high ground is the Heathrow Control Tower, 5 miles to the east, or remained airborne for his flight across the home park is a mystery to this day. Later, in the interview cell, the boy sat safely handcuffed between his two warders. The bruised and hyperventilating figure had been replaced by a docile youth resembling a reformed skinhead who had miraculously seen the light. Only the airy smile, which he turned upon me so obligingly, reminded me of a glider and a harness packed with explosive. As always, he refused to answer any question put to him, and we sat in a silence broken only by his whispered refrain. Ignoring these cryptic mutterings, I studied a list of those present at Windsor Castle. President Mr. Reagan, Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Princess Diana, the US Ambassador Dr. Billy Graham, Apollo astronaut Colonel Tom Stamford, Mr. Henry Ford III, Mr. James Stewart, the presidents of Heinz, IBM and Lockheed Aircraft, and assorted congressmen, military and naval attachés, State Department and CIA proconsuls, Lord Delphon, Mr. Andrew Lloyd Webber, Miss Joanna Lumley. In front of Yang, on a table between us, I laid out the photographs of President Reagan, the Queen, Prince Philip, Charles, and Diana. He showed not a flicker of response, leaned forward, and with his scared chin, nudged the Sotheby's catalog from my open briefcase. He held the Palmer reproduction to his left shoulder, obliquely smiling his thanks. Sly and disingenuous, he was almost implying that I was his accomplice. I remembered how very manipulative such psychopaths could be. Mira Hindley, Brady, and Mary Bell had convinced various naive and well-meaning souls of their religious conversions. Without thinking, I drew the last photograph from the dossier. Colonel Stamford in his white spacesuit floating free above a spacecraft during an orbital flight. The chanting stopped. I heard Yang's heels strike the metal legs of his chair as he drew back involuntarily. A focal seizure of the right hand rattled his handcuffs. He stared at the photograph, but the gaze of his eyes was far beyond the cell around us, and I suspected that he was experiencing a warning aura before an epileptic attack. With a clear shut out to us all, he stiffened in his chair and slipped to the floor in a grand mal. As his head hammered the warder's feet, I realized that he had been chanting not Allah Akbar, but astronaut. Astronaut? Matthew Young, The Personal History of a Psychopath. So what is known of the boy? The special branch investigators assembled a substantial dossier of this deranged young man. Born 1958, Abu Dhabi, father manager of Amoco desalination plant, childhood in the Gulf area, Alaska and Aberdeen. Educational misfit with suspected petit mal epilepsy, but attended Strathclyde University for 2 terms in 1975, computer sciences course. Joined Workers' Revolutionary Party in 1976, arrested outside US Embassy London during anti-nuclear demonstration. Worked as a scaffolder and painter, Jodrell Bank Radio Observatory in 1977. Prosecuted for malicious damage to reflector dish. Jesuit novice, San Francis Xavier Seminary, Dundalk, 1978. Expelled after 3 weeks for sexual misconduct with mother of fellow novice. Fined for being drunk and disorderly during Sculpture of the Space Age exhibition at Serpentine Gallery, London. I could continue reading the entire story. But this is the moment that I can clearly imagine when in probably 96, 95, Graham Guzin and Jeremy Miller, two British artists from London, by reading the story, when they suddenly freeze. Opening, exhibition, Serpentine Gallery. Title, The Sculpture of Space Age. And they decide to make that exhibition happen. Because what I'm reading is not my own writing. It is field notes. Actually, it's forensic diaries of Dr. Richard Greville, Chief Psychiatric Advisor, Home Office. So Graham and Jeremy are reading forensic diary of Richard Greville, and they find this one clue, one hint to an exhibition that took place at Serpentine Gallery in the 70s. It was called Sculpture of Space Age, and it opened in 1972, I think. And they think, why don't we make that exhibition? And they start working on that exhibition. In this forensic diary by Richard Greville, which is actually written by J.G. Ballard, there is no mentioning of works in that exhibition. And the reason I was reading the entire piece of the story is just to give a sense how certain lines of thinking can operate, and how a small mini detail in the story can actually make you to decide that this is a path worth pursuing, and perhaps reifying, perhaps making it tangible and open to other people to experience. So Graham and Jeremy contact J.G. Ballard, and they start communicating, asking what was in the exhibition. Although, as you really can see, the exhibition only takes place in one line of a story. And why I'm choosing this example to talk about exhibition as autonomous fictional realms. I think it's a perfect example of self-contained fields of reference that exhibitions, artists, curators may subscribe to. Because what happens here, Graham and Jeremy decide to make a show that is based on something already existing. So the story of J.G. Ballard is a perfect ground for that, even if the exhibition is mentioned in one sentence. I think the story, which is called The Object of the Attack, could serve as source for multiple exhibitions of all kinds. I think it could be an interesting exercise just to read it and see like what could be extracted or replayed or criticized, or it's an entire field. However, the mentioning of the title, location, year, gives almost a factual hint to make an exhibition happen. And Jeremy and Graham act a bit like, I think, what Coen brothers did with a film called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The title of this film is coming from a film that is mentioned in another film by Preston Sturges called Sullivan's Travel. It's a film from the 40s And in this film, the main character wants to make a film called Oh Brother, Where Are Thou? But of course, what you see in the Sullivan's Travel is just making of the film where Oh Brother, Where Are Thou? That never is being made because there are all kinds of obstructions emerging, and it's an amazing film actually. You should see it. It's about a filmmaker, a film director who decides, very successful Hollywood film director, who decides that for him, the best way to somehow get to the people and get to the social field and somehow go beyond all those fictional stories, all those fabulous and lies that Hollywood produces, is to go to the street, meet people, and to make a film about it, to make a film about his own journey through the reality, through the real. And so that film would be called Oh Brother, Where Are Thou? And at the end of the day, he doesn't do that film, but of course Sullivan's Travels become a great success. And so Kuan brothers take that title and they produce another film which is about something else completely different. And this is, I think, what artists, curators often do as well. They tend to position their work in relation to either some obscure material or presenting it and positioning it as, let's say, a part of it or some kind of sequel. Or they invent non-existing, or let's say previously non-existing sources of inspiration and reference. So let's say you can, a good example would be Jonah Freeman, an artist living in LA, who invented an author called Elizabeth Stone. And this author, Elizabeth Stone, wrote a book about an exhibition that takes place. It's called Sun Exhibition. So it's like a very, very big exhibition where everything is. And in this exhibition, I was once doing a workshop with students where we tried to add more things. What else can be in that exhibition, in Sun Exhibition? Anything can be there. So it's quite a good reference field to position yourself to. So what Jonah did, he made an exhibition of some of the artworks and some of the remaining books of Elizabeth Stone about this Sun exhibition. So he positioned his work in relation to something that was lost or missing or very, very hard to grasp, and made a new work. So there's always this interesting relation happening, almost like totemic, fetishistic, where you refer to something that is somehow has its own force, and it affects you, and it makes you to do specific things, but at the same time, it's never revealed. And that's one way of talking about fiction. And to me, this exhibition is also, well, I also promised not to talk about my own projects, but since I don't have I realized that I think I don't have any more non-ambiguous relationship with my own projects. It's becoming more and more ambiguous. So I feel I can talk about it. I did an exhibition, I curated an exhibition called The Sculpture of Space Age. And the exhibition that Graham and Jeremy were trying to make was a perfect field of reference. Because what happened? What happened that first, they did exact operation that I was interested in at that moment, which is positioning yourself to lost, non-existent, or missing. In this case, it's J.G. Ballard, so it's even something else. But then, what happened with their exhibition? They made a list of artists and list of artworks to be exhibited in that show, together with J.G. Ballard, and they proposed it to Serpentine Gallery. However, it never was realized, because what happened? And I heard it like later from different people. The actual proposal somehow got stuck between the desk in the office. And nobody has seen it, and the sculpture space age remained behind the desk. So to me, then, it was an extra layer of fascination, because you not only have to do with the literature that you extract your source from, but you also have to do with an exhibition that never took place, which is the second layer of fascination. And so I was dealing with all this ungroundedness in the exhibition that took place in David Roberts Foundation in London. But of course, let's say all this like operational path is what I'm quite dubious about now. And I could spend a great deal of time criticizing it, but since the time is running out, I'll probably invite Christina and the rest of our table. But I think Cosmin you will do it better. Freya.